The following is a hockey podcast out of Vancouver and Surrey, British Columbia. It'll only consist of a lot of puck talk and even more BS, or in actual words, banter and satire. Enjoy, and as always, go Canucks go.
The Canucks might be losing their best player, and I might be losing my co-host. I hate 2025 already. Get me out of here.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
A happy Monday, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks, and also a Canucks writer currently with Daily Hive Vancouver. Before we dive into it, we got to thank you for tuning into Locked On Canucks, because it is your Canucks every damn day. And we're not here without you listening to the show, so we appreciate the hell out of you. And we're also not here without those sponsors. And today's episode is brought to you by none other than FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. What a wild weekend if you're a fan of the Vancouver Canucks. And Kyle and I touched on some of it on the post-game show on Saturday night, but we want to dive a bit more into JT Miller and what the hell happened over the weekend in terms of him almost being held out of the lineup, reportedly going into the lineup, and then having a pretty damn good game against the Edmonton Oilers. So what happened with JT Miller and the New York Rangers? Who were some of the rumored pieces involved? And let's talk about why this trade likely makes no sense for the Vancouver Canucks. But before we get into that, I mentioned off the top there in the cold open that, I might be losing my co-host. I just want everyone listening to give their thoughts and prayers to Kyle Bowen. This is what he sent me this morning, man. Kyle Bowen in a hospital bed. My God, my brother, sending you nothing but love and good wishes, my man. And the Lockdown listeners, I hope you do the same to Kyle as well. Look what the Canucks did to Kyle Bowen, man. Unbelievable. Kyle Bowen, if you're a first-time listener, you haven't popped in a while, Kyle Bowen, one of the biggest JT Miller fans out there. And not only did the Packers lose in the playoffs here early in 2025, but JT Miller broke Kyle's heart as well. JT Miller supposed to be the heart and soul of the Vancouver Canucks. And with a couple of performances last week, he looked far from that player who was the emotional engine of the Vancouver Canucks, and a guy who had 100 points last season, a guy who has been a top 15 scorer in the NHL since joining the Vancouver Canucks in the 2019-20 season. And now apparently the Canucks are going to trade this guy. I just don't buy it. And we'll get it more into Patrik Allvin's comments today from his media availability in the second segment. But let's dive a bit more into the Miller situation. So I'm sure you know by now, but Elliot Friedman reported on Saturday that the Vancouver Canucks almost held JT Miller out of the game against against the Edmonton Oilers because there was a pending trade with the New York Rangers that fell through. Some of the reporting that came out today from Thomas Drance of Sportsnet and The Athletic was that the package in return for JT Miller wasn't quite the big gargantuan package of Lafreniere and Braden Schneider that many are hoping for. It was something along the lines of Philip Hedl, Ryan Lindgren, and maybe a conditional first-round pick. And if that's the best that the New York Rangers can do for JT Miller, then the Canucks got to hang up the phone and block Chris Drury, put him on mute for at least 48 hours, because that would be a god-awful return for a guy in JT Miller who has been one of the top scorers in the NHL. And you see on the interweb, again, there's so much vitriol in this fan base between Team Petey and Team Miller. Like, is this effing Twilight here? I don't even know the guys there, but is this giving me some Twilight vibes from, the late 2000s there? I see some talk out there about how, JT Miller, he's overvalued in his own market. Like, Canuck fans are valuing him too high. Sometimes I don't know if Canuck fans value him highly enough. We're talking about a guy in JT Miller who, prior to this season, might have been one of the most underrated superstars in the league. He very rarely gets mentioned in the same breath as guys like, he's not up there on the Kucherov, McKinnon, Matthews level, but is he in that next tier of superstar players? I would argue he is, right? The numbers speak for themselves. In terms of points per game, he may be right now the all-time points per game leader in Canucks history. If not, he's right up there with Pettersson, with Hughes, with Bure. JT Miller has brought it for this team for half a decade now. And obviously, it's come and gone in spurts, as we've seen this season. But again, if the rumored return for JT Miller, something like Philip Hedl, who, by the way, is a third-line center, and he's not even that young either. You're talking about a guy who's 25 years old, a guy who's played a few hundred NHL games, a guy who is 45% in the faceoff dot. You're talking about Philip Hedl, Braden Schneider, who, sure, he's 23, he's big, he's a right shot guy, but he is still a third-pairing defenseman and a conditional first-round pick. What does that do for a Canucks team right now who should be in a Stanley Cup contention window? A deal like that makes no sense for the Vancouver Canucks. Now, let's play a little devil's advocate here on the program, okay? Let's do it. What if the JT Miller trade did involve Alexis Lafreniere, the first overall pick in 2020, who again is now 23 years old? Does that make sense if it's Lafreniere and Miller in a trade? Now, you got to think from the Rangers' point of view, right? And you see this talk among their fan base right now. Does it make sense to give up a boatload of assets and young assets like Lafreniere and or Schneider and, high draft picks for a guy in Miller who's going to be 32 in a month, joining a team that is currently outside the playoff bar, or, at best, a middle of the pack team? They aren't the President's Trophy team from last season. Does that make sense for them? I think it's a fair question, but again, who cares? This is Locked On Canucks. This is the Locked On Rangers, all right? But for the Canucks, you got to think, does Lafreniere for Miller make sense for this team? For me, again, JT Miller is by far the better player, right? 100 points last season. I think Alexis Lafreniere really just had his breakout last season for the New York Rangers. But you can see some parallels between JT Miller and Alexis Lafreniere in terms of guys who highly touted prospects. Obviously, Lafreniere more highly touted than Miller. Guys who maybe struggled a bit as they entered the league. But guys who certainly have sky-high potential. And Lafreniere, with his mix of skill and straight-line play, does have that sky-high potential. Does a trade like that make sense for the Canucks? I think that's a deal, Lafreniere for Miller, that you would consider if you're the Canucks. I think you'd like the Rangers to add. I don't think the Rangers would add, but it's something you consider if you're the Vancouver Canucks. Now, would I have the big brass cojones to do that? Nah, because I bleed the blue and green, and I still believe in JT Miller. Call me crazy, call me stupid. I'm still believing in the guy. But a deal like that gives you pause if it is, in fact, Lafreniere as the centerpiece of that deal. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because Thomas Drance basically came on airwaves earlier today and said that he doesn't think it includes Alexis Lafreniere. However, Larry Brooks of the New York Post did say that Lafreniere could be the centerpiece of a JT Miller deal, and he believes he is in play in a trade for JT Miller. So Canucks fans, hit me up in the comments and let me know what you think. Does a trade, Miller for Lafreniere, whether it's 1-for-1 or if there's some addition on the Rangers' end, does that make sense to you if you're a fan of the Vancouver Canucks? Again, I don't know if I'm quite doing that deal, but you could see a world where if you trade Miller and get Lafreniere, is Lafreniere the best replacement? Do you then trade Besser to get assets to upgrade your second-line center position? And of course, we haven't even mentioned the name Elias Pettersson yet. A lot hinges on him not being a 60-point player and being something closer to the 100-point player that we've seen in years past. At least the point-per-game guy that he's been in his NHL career up until the last 11 to 12 months. Coming up on the other side, Patrik Allvin spoke to the media for the first time in a little bit here. And what did he say about the JT Miller situation? What does he think about this Canucks team right now? Do trades seem imminent based on the comments from Patrik Allvin? Let's get into it on the other side. But first, we got to shout out our friends over at FanDuel, baby. you know the deal. If you like to place a few buckaroonies on sports, you got to go check out FanDuel, right? And whether it's NHL regular season action or the NFL playoffs, make sure that you use FanDuel, especially if you're a new customer, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get not $100, not $200, but $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. Not the smartest guy in the world, but I do like to dabble on FanDuel, and I was 3 for 4 of my picks this NFL weekend. I had Houston covering. They did not. I had Washington covering at far less than the actual line, which is 8. I think I had them at about 3.5. They did that. Bill straight up to win, and then Barkley, I had him with a touchdown, 20 receiving yards, and 100 rushing yards, which he absolutely crushed. So once in a while, I'm right. I try to be right more than once in a while here on Locked On Canucks. If you think you are right a little more than once in a while, and you like to bet on sports, go visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's on FanDuel.com. Remember, if you have problems with gambling, be safe, be smart, use your game sense. Sorry, play now. And check out the number in the comments here or in the bio of the episode here on Locked On Canucks. Let's get back to the show, baby. All right, we're back here on Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every damn day. I'll try to get to some of your comments towards the end of the episode. Comments always popping off here on Locked On Canucks. I do believe we have the best listeners in the world, and there's some heat in the comments, man. I'm going to shout out Matt real quick because Matt is on team trade Elias Pettersson. He's been that way for a while, and he's saying JT wants to stay. Maybe Matt and JT Miller are friends. I'm not quite sure. And he's also saying PD equals Luongo by year 4. You'll be angry. Trade him before you can, or at least it's a lot more difficult and you get a worse return. The PD to Luongo comparison I find interesting because, we're emotional here in Vancouver. It's a hockey hotbed. We care about this hockey team. And if you look back on what happened with Luongo, I think most were okay with the idea of him being traded or celebrated the idea of him being traded. But looking back on it, I think there's a ton of respect in terms of what Luongo did for this hockey team. Maybe not as much regret about the trade itself because the Canucks contention window had died down, but I do think a major risk with trading Elias Pettersson is the fact that he just goes and absolutely pops off in another market. And the fact, again, and I've mentioned it before, every dayers know, the fact that nearly every fan base in the league is talking about, well, what can we give up to get Elias Pettersson, probably tells you that trading him is a bad idea. I think Matt makes a final point that, Pettersson's going to get you more in a deal. And I agree. And he should get you more in a deal. He's 26 years old. He had 100 points 2 seasons ago. He was 11 points away from becoming the first Swede in NHL history to have back-to-back 100-point seasons. We do forget about that sometimes because of how mediocre he's been over the past 11 to 12 months. But Elias Pettersson is still a heck of a hockey player. Now, a guy who many of us have assumed that this market is a heck of a GM is Patrik Allvin. And he spoke to the media earlier today about the Vancouver Canucks, the state of the organization. And I jotted down a number of quotes here. Let's get to a few of them. But in terms of where blame has gone in this market, right? I think most of us are blaming the Stars. A lot of us blaming the defense. A lot of people also blaming Rick Tocchet and the coaching staff. And I will say Allvin went out of his way a number of times to talk about how the coaching staff has done a really good job. And in fact, that was one of his first quotes of the entire presser. He also mentioned that he talks with Rick Tocchet every day about how to improve this team and reminded us that there's a club option on Rick Tocchet towards the end of the season. So no real urgency to get an extension done with Rick Tocchet, but it's clear that Patrik Allvin is a big fan. Now, in terms of JT Miller, of course, Allvin wasn't taking the bait when asked about JT Miller and what happened on the weekend in terms of him almost being traded. Now, what I did find interesting is Thomas Durant asked about Miller and the situation, and he said, quote, "I don't want to comment on any specific players here. I thought JT was really excellent on Saturday against McDavid and Draisaitl. Then he wanted to go on to talk about how there's a bug going around the room and he wonders about availability because JT Miller was not at the Dice at Nice Canucks Gala last night either. I found it fascinating that he says he doesn't want to comment on any specific players because this was towards the end of the presser. And at that point, he had talked specifically about a number of players, including Brock Besser, his free agent status and what to do with that player. So for him to talk about Brock Besser and, basically his lines where he has a good relationship with his agent, they're still evaluating the player. No decision's been made on Brock Besser yet. For him to comment on Brock Besser and then for him to say, I don't want to comment on specific players when asked about JT Miller, I think that tells you that something is up with JT Miller and the Vancouver Canucks. And you can kind of sense it from Miller's comments on Saturday night as well. And who knows how much of that is Miller reading the rumors himself, because he reads the rumors, right? These players are aware of what's being said about them and how much is actually true. But again, Allvin, he had the opportunity to shut it down and say, we're not trading JT Miller. He did not say that. And he didn't say that with Elias Pettersson when he talked to Ian McIntyre about a month ago. So I think sometimes, especially when you're listening to an NHL general manager talk, someone who is PR trained, you do got to read between the tea leaves a bit. And the fact that he said he didn't want to comment on Miller when he's out there commenting about a number of other players on the team, I think it tells you all you need to know about the situation between JT Miller and the Vancouver Canucks. Now, that being said, Patrik Allvin, when asked about his team's performance this season, he talked a lot about the injuries and the controversy that this team has faced. He talked about, here's one of his quotes. You see the signs of a good team coming together and playing the right way. Talked about his defense as well. Our defense might be criticized for a lot of things, but they're very capable of defending. It's a 5-man unit, and our forwards have to be back and defending. So, again, he did this a number of times at the press conference, went to defend his team, talking about how they've been inconsistent, but performed admirably considering the circumstances. And a number of times brought up that they only allowed 15 shots against the Edmonton Oilers. So Canucks fans, if you listen to the post game on Saturday night, what did I tell you? And I know Kyle is on a number of meds. One love to Kyle Bowen. Get better, Kyle Bowen. I mentioned it that the Canucks aren't going out and making a big move after that performance against the Edmonton Oilers. Now, I agree that one game doesn't change the narrative. You got to do it consistently. But Patrik Allvin clearly believes in the team that he has put together. He believes in the defense. Again, when asked about the defense, mentioned the injuries to Hughes and Hronek as well. He believes in the team that he's put together. At least that's what he's saying publicly to me. When asked about JT Miller, again, complimented him in terms of how he played against McDavid and Draisaitl. So, look, I think the takeaway here is that Patrik Allvin probably is less likely than what's being let on in public to make a blockbuster move. Now, that being said, I don't want to comment on JT Miller, to me, gave me some pause there. Because, again, he could have shut this down and he didn't. But I do think that he wants to see this core work. Because another thing he mentioned time and time again is he talked about wanting to make this team better. Here's one of his quotes. I'm always trying to explore how to make our team better. The hardest part is to evaluate our team in the midst of all the injuries. If you want to make the Canucks better, does that involve trading JT Miller or Elias Pettersson? Of course not. Of course it doesn't. How often do you trade your best player and win that trade? We mentioned the Eichel trade in the past. Even the Bo Horvat trade, that trade itself, the first Aatu Räty and Anthony Beauvillier, that wasn't really a winning trade. What won the trade was trading the first to get Filip Hronek. And now, of course, the Canucks could trade these guys and then flip assets in another deal. And I do think that's what they would aim to do if they traded one of their star players. But more than that, I believe that Allvin wants to see this core work and work well together. And I don't think he's giving up on them just yet. Again, one of his last quotes here, when asked about his team this season, we've all seen this team, when they're at their best, what they're capable of. They're really good players on this team. Patrik Allvin believes in the Vancouver Canucks. most of us listening have been fans of the Vancouver Canucks much, much longer than Patrik Allvin's here. So I think we are more skeptical inherently. I'm more skeptical than Patrik Allvin's leading on if this core can truly get it done. If this defense is as big of an issue as Patrik Allvin is pretending it's not. There are clearly issues with this hockey team, but Patrik Allvin, as active as he's been in the trade market, for the first time sounds like he is kind of doubling down on this core and believing in what they can do. Now, of course, one of his last quotes at the press conference was, anything can happen. And I think that is something that Canucks fans need to remember as well. Coming up on the other side, I do want to try to get to some of your comments, and I will touch on the GOATs of the week from last week as well. You're listening to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every damn day. We'll be back after shouting at our friends over at Select Quote. Man, oh man, if you need life insurance, you gotta go check out our friends over at Select Quote, because they got that winning mentality, baby. They know that in sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Stanley Cup Finals, and the same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from Select Quote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. Select Quote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. They've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. All right. That is older than every person on the Vancouver Canucks. How about them apples? What sets Select Quote apart from the others is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage up to $5 million. No medical exam required, and no finger up the you-know-what unless you want. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Select Quote. They shop. You save, baby. All right, we're back here on Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every damn day. And let me get to a couple comments here, because I just saw the comment of the year come in. Makes me want to cry bad. Comment of the day, and has nothing to do with JT Miller. I apologize. It's Nancy Bowen, Kyle's aunt, saying, hey, Locked On, Kyle is doing fine. Just needs a bit of a tune-up before back to all good. Thank you, Nancy. Can't do it though, God. All right, okay. In terms of other comments right now, again, let's touch on this one from Matt. Okay, I've given Matt some floor here. Besser to Winnipeg is an option. When I did the show last week talking about Brock Besser and some teams that could be involved, I talked about the Minnesota Wild and the LA Kings, and that was mainly because those are the two playoff teams that could use a scoring punch most. So with Winnipeg, they do have the depth there. I do wonder what a return for Brock Besser would look like. I mean, it's funny because Winnipeg was a team last year that acquired Tyler Toffoli for a second and a third. And that was the trade that I talked about being a comparable return for Brock Besser, although you would expect more for Besser based on his scoring profile and his age as well. Let's touch on the JT rumors a bit more, because more reports have come out this morning. The Carolina Hurricanes, apparently a team that has been interested in JT Miller. Both Carolina Hurricanes reporters and Rick Dhaliwal reporting that the Carolina Hurricanes, they thought the price was too high eventually. Maybe the prices come down a bit. And then Dhaliwal mentioned that Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Jack Roslovic are players that Vancouver have liked in the past. No. Don't do it. I think Allvin knows better, but just don't do it. It's a bad idea. I know Carolina's got some good prospects on D that could intrigue the Canucks. Scott Morrow, Alex Nichishkin, who is tearing it up in the KHL. So there's some pieces there, but Kotkaniemi and Roslovic, my God, that's a tough one now. Of course, the thing to remember is that the Canucks are going to go out and retain salary on JT Miller. He's already got a really good contract. But you got to make the cap dollars work. Almost everyone's capped out. So the Canucks got to bring back probably about $8 million in assets this season. And that's the reason why Ryan Lindgren was mentioned in the JT Miller trade as well. Again, Ryan Lindgren has been pretty awful this season. I do have his player card here for the viewers on YouTube. He's kind of fallen off a cliff since, really being an elite shutdown defenseman in 2021-22, and he's kind of trended downward slowly since then. But Ryan Lindgren is a UFA at the end of the season, making 4.5. So that's why in a Miller trade, he's a name that's likely to get mentioned as an option to see. Could have worked in Vancouver, and if not, you can move on pretty quick and have $4.5 million to work with in the offseason. But again, I'm going to keep saying this. The Canucks will lose a JT Miller trade. They will, unless potentially it involves Alexis Lafreniere. Even then, I'm still skeptical about them winning that trade. All right, let's get to the segment that we run every Monday here on Locked On Canucks. We like to call it Goats of the Week. All right, here's the Goats of the Week here on Locked On Canucks. Your Canucks every damn day. We do this. I try to do this every Monday at least, or at least before the games kick off for the week. And by God, so far this season has been Quinn Hughes, Kevin Lankinen, Kiefer the Reefer Sherwood, and Connor Garland by far the leaders in terms of the Goats of the Week. And last week, Hughes and Lankinen, of course, 1 and 2. Once again, JT Miller and Elias Pettersson a little further down the list, which is, again, a troubling sign for your Vancouver Canucks. So last week, let's start at number 5. And before I get into it, tough week for the Canucks. It really was. They get blown up by the Jets last Tuesday. They get blown up by the Kings on Thursday. And then they put together a pretty good performance against Edmonton on Saturday. So only 4 players scored goals for the Canucks last week. And one of them is at number 5. I have it at Danton Heinen. Danton Heinen also had the best Corsi 4 on the team last week as well. He played well in his fourth line minutes. And again, picks up a big even strength goal against the Oilers on Saturday night. Danton Heinen has underperformed a bit so far, but again, I think he's brought that good defensive floor. He's been a good penalty killer. Not necessarily a bargain, but certainly not a ripoff at $2.25 million. I do think Heinen has another gear in his game. At number 4, returning to the lineup this week, Filip Hronek. And now I think it was a bit of there were some tough moments for Filip Hronek overall, but he was a big reason why the Canucks only allowed 15 shots against the Oilers on Saturday night. This team desperately missed Filip Hronek, and he had some turnovers last week, which I didn't love in the Winnipeg game, even one in the Edmonton game where I think he kind of gifted Draisaitl that second goal. But this team desperately missed Filip Hronek. His poise back there, you can just see it in the way he moves the puck. He is miles and miles and miles ahead of the other defensemen on this team. At number 3 on Goats of the Week, he gets up here just for his antics on Saturday night. Connor Garland, baby. Again, just the 1 assist. But he has just been an absolute dog for the Vancouver Canucks, whether it is defending Connor McDavid. And, I know he's gone a bit quiet offensively. He really just has 1 assist in his past 5 games now. But he's playing a ton for this Vancouver Canucks. And much like last season, even when he's not putting up points, he's finding a way to be noticeable. He's finding a way to contribute. And looking at the ice time from last week, Connor Garland averaged 19.07. That was 4th most on the team, only behind Hughes, Hronek, and Elias Pettersson. At number 2 on the list, I have Nils Höglander, who finally snapped his ridiculously long scoring drought as well. 34 games. And honestly, probably should have had another one against Edmonton on Saturday night. Had a couple of really good chances in that game as well. And number 1, as it always is, it's Quinn Hart Hughes. My God, this guy is too damn good at the game of hockey. Quick on his edges, 3 goals in 3 games, 2 power play goals, 1 at even strength, 1 game winner against the Edmonton Oilers. Man, oh man, are the Canucks actually going to deal JT Miller? I hope not. I hope not. And Mofo in the comments, Mofo in the comments saying the team that trades for Miller will be the one that no one expects. So what is that team that no one expects? What is that team? Again, the Rangers, the Hurricanes are the 2 most rumored to be in for Miller services right now. Reports from Elliot Friedman as of today that Miller prefers to go to an Eastern U.S. team. Could the Blue Jackets be that team to push for JT Miller? They are currently fighting for their playoff lives. They have the assets to make a deal. They were rumored actually to be in services for Brock Besser as well. I mean, too many damn rumors surrounding this hockey team. Can we just win some games? Can we just win some games? God damn it. Finally, last comment to Chris Storman. And this is why we have the best listeners in the world here on Locked On Canucks. Does Kyle need my kidney? I'm not sure if he does, but Chris, if he does, he can also have my kidney. That's no problem. That's the kind of family we got here on Locked On Canucks, both with Kyle and I, and especially with you listening. Okay, Locked On Canucks is nothing without you tuning in. Whether you're an everydayer, a first-time listener, an occasional listener, anyone in between, we appreciate the hell out of you for tuning in to Locked On Canucks. I'm not sure how long I'll be riding solo, but goddamn, do I miss my co-host, Kyle Bowen. And like Nancy Bowen said, we all just trying to get through this. Amen to that. If you like what we're doing, go subscribe and like this on YouTube. On the podcast side, go follow us and leave a 5-star review. But for now, I got to get the hell out of here. Thanks again for tuning in to Locked On Canucks.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.